really skeptical about how real this was. So I decided to do an event that looked at the effects of Twitter as a platform on the media, celebrity, advertising, and politics. And what I discovered leading up to the conference was, in fact, this stuff was really real. In fact, but then I had like a major breakdown a month before the conference because I was thinking, what if Twitter gets sold? How relevant is my conference? And then I realized I was not doing an event about Twitter. What I was doing was an event about the birth of the real-time internet and how the world was becoming flat and how access to information was changing and how, in fact, we're living in a time where there are no gatekeepers, or at least they're going away. And we're living in a time where people, in a very Tom and Friedman-esque kind of way, have access to information. What they do with it is up to themselves. They don't necessarily verify it, but there's something amazing happening. And so I ended up doing a series of events. I did it in New York, then LA, then London, then Tel Aviv, and then Barcelona, then at South by Southwest, and most recently I did it again in New York City last month. And while we had about 1,100 people visit the event in New York City, 128,000 people tuned in, which was kind of cool. And a little bit about what I'm going to talk about is something which I call the connected me, which is a social revolution that's taking place. But before I start, really, I'm just curious, industries represented here. How many people here are from the media? How many people here work for agencies? Okay, how many people here do agencies, media? How many people here are from the arts? A few of you from the arts, okay. Anyone here from professional lawyers or accountants? You won't admit to it if you were. Anybody here students or people trying to figure stuff out? Wow, it's always one or two or three, good. And other people that I didn't, what other professions are represented here? Just shout out. What?
Custom brokers and transportation.
Custom brokers, transportation, okay.
Education.
Education is very big, yes. Where?
Twitterer.
Twitterer, oh sure. Someone else?
Well, web developer.
Web developers, right. So how many developers are here from the text? A lot of developers, okay. So you may find part of this absolutely boring, I'm sorry. But what I found actually is that there is systemic change happening around the world, and that the conference that took place in New York City had absolutely nothing in common with the people in Los Angeles or in London or Tel Aviv or Barcelona, except everything. And that the industries that are actually changing is everything from public diplomacy to public safety, from fashion to real estate, from being a celebrity to being a producer in Hollywood, to being in the music industry and understanding how to connect to people. The world is changing around us. And there's something special happening in the sense that 3 years ago, if any of you went to school and studied marketing or advertising or branding, and if you were to tell someone that one day a major brand will be listening to people, they'd think you're crazy. Now, it's not that companies never cared before because everyone had suggestion boxes, but we're living in a time now that economic cycles are being affected by moods. That companies for the first time are realizing there are people out there that care, and major corporations and minor corporations are going through a change right now where they actually have to listen to customers and they have to engage and they have to protect their brands and they have to do all these other things. Now, one of the challenges, how many people here work for agencies? I'm just curious. So one of the biggest challenges I would argue that an agency has to face right now is that you have to re-educate your customers to tell them what they tell you to do. Because the metrics of how they evaluate you has changed. It's no longer about page views, right? It's all about engagement. It's about how they connect to their audiences. And the rules of engagement have actually changed. And so many people are facing a very awkward situation today where companies, where people who companies who they're hiring are telling them, reboot yourself. Or you have to get re-educated because we can't serve you right because what you're asking us to do for you no longer matters. And then there's a confrontation because the companies themselves were asleep and didn't realize the world had moved. And so there's just a lot of opportunity, a lot of change, and at the same time a lot of confusion. But I'll get on that in a little bit. Let me just give you a little background about me. Because before I did voiceover IP, a long time ago, when I was in school, when I was in elementary school, I was 9 years old and feeling pretty invisible and pretty lonely. I don't know if any of you have ever known what it's like to be lonely or feel invisible, but I was kind of like by myself and pretty much, well, by myself. just all the time. And one day my father told me to call my uncle up and told me to call him up and ask him to take me for a factory tour, because my uncle actually had a factory in Long Island. And I was really not terribly interested in what I saw. But then when I got into my uncle's office, he had this little box, and he turned it on. It turned out to be a radio. And he turned it on, he turned the dial, I heard all these squeaky voices. And my uncle, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, because I really could not understand what anyone was saying. But my uncle turned the dial, sits down in his chair and says, CQ, CQ, this is K2QQ1 calling CQ. And then it's just silence. And then my uncle repeats this a few times, and all of a sudden, there was a roar of voices reaching out to my uncle, talking to him, and I thought, this is really weird. And they were talking like in code, in these different abbreviations, but all of a sudden I realized what was happening was my uncle was talking to people randomly from all over the world. He didn't know any of these people before they said hello to him. He probably never met them before, but they had a common bond because they were ham radio operators. And despite whatever country they came from, they found a way to say hello, to be humane to each other, to find something to share. Maybe it was how strong the signal was, the weather, maybe it was the equipment they were using, but they found something to talk about. And this lasted about an hour, and I was hooked. And from the time I was 9 to the time I was 12, I was absolutely fixated on teaching myself Morse code, teaching myself advanced electronic theory, go figure that out, and the rules and regulations to be an amateur radio operator in the States. And when I was 12 and a half, I actually had a license to communicate. Imagine if you had to take 3 years to go on the internet, right? So I finally, when I was 12 and a half, I actually had a chance to, talk to people. And it was a long, thought-out process, but if you ever think about being alone and looking for ways to get around loneliness, this is one way to drive yourself nuts, but at the same time give you an empowerment. And then, ultimately, I'm an older brother of 2 sisters. And my sisters know this very well, because they woke up every morning to hear me say, CQ, CQ, this is WA2BOT calling CQ. And I would repeat that randomly until people started talking to me. And the magic of having people talk back to you is kind of cool. And then all of a sudden you start saying hello, and maybe you speak to people in countries you never heard of, and cities you don't know where they are. But after a while, things become familiar. And growing up, I sort of spent somewhere between 40 to 60 hours a week on the radio, in addition to going to school when I was in the mood to it. And so I had 2 lives even then. I had my school life, which I was more or less still pretty invisible, and I had my radio life, which was me. And I kind of grew up on amateur radio, and I think by the time I was 14 or 15, I kind of feel like I learned everything I ever needed to know about social media. Because I could tune the radio dial, hear a familiar voice, listen to somebody talk, either jump in and say something or just let them talk, tune to another frequency and hear these people talk. And it was kind of cool because I felt at home. I didn't have to ever meet these people. I randomly we didn't have tweet-ups back then, but there were ham radio swap meets. My parents were very protective and really didn't think that as a 12-year-old I should be going to these swap meets. Because they know I could not describe what the people looked like, I just knew what they sounded like. But there was something special about that because ultimately, as a kid, I ended up finding myself, in times of need and trouble, passing messages. So that when there were blackouts, when people had no power, they needed to get messages to loved ones, or when people were overseas trying to pull back during holiday season, because there was a time when long-distance phone calls cost a lot of money, at least from outside the States into the States. And my parents never complained about me phone patching the radio to the telephone. So I did it all the time. And that was sort of me growing up. And then, to have a social life, I was always fond of music. And so I ended up being a DJ, because I found out that even though I wasn't going out on dates, if I DJ'd parties, I got invited to Sweet 16s, because I could play them. I could do bat mitzvahs, I could do whatever, but it was a way to get out of the house. And so I was able to sort of cross-pollinate my geeky existence with that. And at the time, I actually also ran an underground radio station on shortwave, which was fun for me, and I traumatized my sisters in the process, because